She traveled over 300 miles to celebrate her best friend's birthday. She posted a photo at the beach on November the 13th, 2021, smiling in the sun, looking like someone who had nowhere in the world to be except exactly where she was. Her family received a voice message from her 2 days later in which she said she was safe and heading home soon. But her voice didn't sound right. And in the background, there was wind. A lot of wind. Not the sound of someone sheltering inside a house, waiting for a ride. The sound of someone already outside, near the coast, in the dark. By the time investigators found her, she had been buried under a desolate, brush-covered coastal sandbank for 18 days. She was 21 years old. She had a 2-year-old daughter waiting for her in Paraná. And the person who lured her into that house was someone she called a friend. My name is Harrison Cross, and this is the Blackout Tapes. The case we're examining today takes place on the southern coast of the state of Santa Catarina, Brazil, in November 2021. It begins as what appears to be a holiday trip between friends. It ends as one of the most documented instances of what investigators and criminologists in Brazil call a tribunal do crime. An extrajudicial execution carried out in the style of organized crime courts, by people who had no formal affiliation with any faction, but who had fully absorbed the paranoid logic of one. 3 people were convicted. Their combined sentences exceed 60 years. But before any of that, a young woman named Amanda Albach Silva packed a bag, crossed the state border, and walked into a house she would never walk out of. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the first week of November 2021 and to a relationship that, on its surface, looked like an ordinary friendship. Amanda Albach Silva was from Fazenda Rio Grande, a municipality in the metropolitan region of Curitiba in the state of Paraná. She was 21 years old, and she was a mother. Her daughter had just turned 2. People who knew Amanda described her as active on social media. She posted regularly. She kept people updated on her life. She had the kind of presence that means people notice when it goes quiet. She was not someone who disappeared without a trace, which, as investigators would later note, is precisely what made the cover-up so difficult to sustain. Among her social connections was a woman named Diane Mayara Pascual. The two had known each other from the same region in Paraná before Diane relocated to the coast of Santa Catarina, specifically to the Praia de Itapirubá Sul in the municipality of Laguna. The friendship persisted across the distance, as friendships sometimes do. And when November arrived and Diane's birthday approached, Amanda accepted what seemed like a natural invitation. Come to the coast, spend the holiday long weekend, celebrate together. There was no reason, from the outside, to read anything threatening into that invitation. People travel for birthdays. Friends who move away stay in touch. Amanda took the trip. The last photograph Amanda posted publicly was taken on November 13, 2021, at the Praia do Canto in the municipality of Imbituba. A beach photograph. Sun, sand, the kind of image that signals vacation. Court records and the subsequent police investigation would later use that post as a timestamp. The last verifiable moment of normalcy. The last entry in a digital timeline that was about to become something very different. The following day, November 14th, the group traveled together to Florianópolis, the state capital, to attend a party at a beach club in the area known as Jurerê International. Multiple sources confirm this. What happened on the return trip from that party is where the timeline begins to fracture. According to the police investigation led by Detective Bruno Fernandes of the Criminal Investigation Division in Laguna, the pivot point occurred during or shortly after the return from Florianópolis. The inquiry identified what investigators concluded was the triggering factor, and when I first read this detail in the case files, I understood immediately why the defense at trial had such a difficult time walking it back. because the triggering factor reveals not just what happened, but the entire cognitive framework that made it possible. Douglas Straccioni da Silva, Diane's partner and co-resident at the address in Itapiruba Sul, had ties to the local drug trade. The investigation established this clearly. According to case documentation, Amanda had, at some point during her stay, done two things that Douglas interpreted as existential threats. First, she allegedly spoke to third parties about his involvement in drug trafficking. Second, and perhaps more incendiary in his mind, she had photographed a firearm that Douglas kept illegally inside the house. Now, from the outside, and frankly from any rational perspective, those two facts are serious, but they do not constitute a death sentence. But inside the operational logic of someone embedded in the drug trade, someone who has internalized the paranoid code of criminal organizations, they translate into something else entirely. Douglas concluded, without evidence, without verification, without any actual proof, that Amanda was a spy, that she was affiliated with a rival faction, that the entire visit had been an infiltration operation designed to map the house and set up an ambush. What the criminal underworld in Brazil calls a casinha, a trap. I want to be clear about something. Investigators examined Amanda's phone. They reviewed her communications, her contacts, her social media accounts. They found nothing. No affiliation with any criminal organization. No evidence of any plan. The theory that justified what happened next was, in the words of the prosecution at trial, entirely delusional. But delusion, when it is armed and surrounded by accomplices, is enough. On the morning of November 15, 2021, beginning at approximately 11 o'clock, Amanda Albach was restrained inside the house at Praia de Itapiruba Sul. What followed lasted approximately 8 hours. The forensic report produced after the recovery of her remains is precise on this point. Examiners documented a severe fracture of the nasal bone consistent with blunt force trauma sustained while the victim was alive. This was not a defensive wound. This was the result of direct, repeated physical assault. She was bound. She was gagged with adhesive tape. A firearm was kept on her at all times. According to testimony gathered in the investigation, the interrogation that took place during those 8 hours had two stated objectives: to extract a confession about the supposed ambush and to compel her to provide access to her cell phone. To unlock it, to hand over what Douglas believed would be the proof of her betrayal. The proof never came, because there was no proof to be found. What I think is essential to understand about those 8 hours is this: the absence of evidence did not change the outcome. In the logic of what criminologists have documented as the Tribunal do crime ritual, which originated in Brazilian prison systems as a method of settling disputes within criminal factions and has since spread into civilian contexts, the verdict is always predetermined. The torture is not investigative. It is performative. Amanda was not going to be released because she could not confess to something that did not exist. She was going to be executed regardless of what she said. There were 3 people in that house restraining one young woman with a broken nose and tape over her mouth. Victor Straccioni da Silva, Douglas's brother, was the 3rd member of that group. Court records note that Victor was under 21 years of age at the time of the crime, a circumstance that would later become relevant in sentencing. His role, as the prosecution established at trial, was to ensure numerical superiority, to eliminate any possibility of escape, of resistance, of help reaching her. What happens next is something that speaks directly to how these crimes eventually unravel, even when the perpetrators believe they have covered everything. Before the execution, the 3 defendants forced Amanda to record a voice message. She was to send it to her family via a messaging application. The content was dictated to her. She was instructed to say that she was fine, that she would be returning home to Fazenda Rio Grande the following day in the early morning hours, using a rideshare application. Now, if you read this plan on paper, it has a certain crude logic to it. Create the impression that the victim left voluntarily. Delay the missing persons report. Buy time. But here is what the people who forced Amanda to record that message did not account for. Her family knew her voice. According to statements gathered by investigators, the family members who received that audio noticed anomalies immediately. The voice was strained in a way that was not normal. There was something in the delivery that did not match Amanda. And there was something else. A sound in the background. Wind. A heavy, sustained coastal wind. Not the sound of someone indoors at rest, waiting for morning to travel home. That wind placed her outside, near the beach, at a moment when she was supposed to be safe inside a house. The family's instinct that something was catastrophically wrong was correct. By the time that recording was made, Amanda was almost certainly already being moved. Between approximately 8 and 9 o'clock in the evening on November 15th, the group transported Amanda from the address in Laguna to a location in the neighboring municipality of Imbituba. The destination was the Praia de Itapiruba Norte, a desolate stretch of brush-covered sand dunes, far from streetlights, far from foot traffic, the kind of place that absorbs sound and leaves no witnesses. According to the case documentation and Douglas's own admission in subsequent interrogations, 2 shots were fired. One of them was directed at Amanda's head. The forensic report confirmed the cause of death. A grave was dug in the sand. Her body was buried. The case narrative as it circulated in Brazilian media in the initial days after discovery included a detail so extreme that it became the most referenced element of the crime. The claim that Douglas had forced Amanda to dig her own grave before being shot. That version came from Douglas himself in an early statement to investigators. It spread. It became part of the story that the public knew. I think about this detail carefully because it matters for understanding who these people were. In organized crime circles in Brazil, there is a kind of performative cruelty that functions as status currency. The claim of having degraded someone completely before killing them is not just a description of events. It is an assertion of power. Whether Douglas said it because it was true or because he wanted investigators and eventually the public to know that he was capable of it, is something I cannot determine with certainty from the files. What I can tell you is that in subsequent interrogations, Douglas walked back that version. He told investigators that he had dug the grave himself with tools brought from the residence. That is the version that entered the trial record as the supported account. Whether the first version was a lie told out of sadism or the second version was a revision made to limit moral exposure, I leave for you to assess. On November 19th, 2021, 4 days after Amanda was killed, the civil police of Santa Catarina formally received the missing persons report filed by her family. The investigation that began that day, led by Detective Bruno Fernandes of the Criminal Investigation Division in Laguna, would become a case study in what forensic investigators now call digital footprint analysis. The reconstruction of a timeline through the electronic records that modern devices generate without any active participation from their users. The investigators made a deliberate decision not to rely primarily on oral testimony. Witnesses in cases involving organized crime dynamics are unreliable not because they are dishonest, but because the social environment creates powerful incentives against cooperation. Instead, the team pursued 2 parallel lines of technical evidence. The first was cell tower data. Every mobile phone, when powered on and connected to a network, pings the nearest transmitting station. Those connection logs are retained by carriers and are available to law enforcement under judicial authorization. The record of which tower Amanda's phone connected to, and at what time, provided investigators with a geographic trace of her movements on November 15th. The second source was the Facebook platform's geolocation logs. Under court order, the company provided data on the last accesses to Amanda's profile. Not just the content of what was posted, but the physical coordinates from which those accesses were made. The synthesis of these two datasets produced what the technical report described in the case documentation as an unambiguous result. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon on November 15th, 2021, when Amanda was already being held, already tortured, already hours into the ordeal that would kill her, her cell phone was physically located at the residential address of Diane Mayara Pascual and Douglas Straccioni da Silva at Praia de Itapiruba Sul in the municipality of Laguna. That single data point tied Amanda to her killers in time and space with a precision that no oral denial could overcome. The three defendants fled the state. This detail, I think, says a great deal about how they understood the investigation they were facing, because the flight was both conspicuous and operationally counterproductive. Court records document that in the days immediately following the crime, one of the Straccioni brothers terminated his formal employment contract. The other terminated the lease on the property in Laguna. They left their civil obligations behind and relocated to Canoas, a city in the metropolitan region of Porto Alegre, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. They crossed a state border and went underground. What they apparently did not account for is that the same digital infrastructure that had already mapped their location on November 15th was perfectly capable of continuing to track them. On December 2nd, 2021, officers from the civil police located all three suspects in Canoas and executed the arrest warrants. The interrogations that followed revealed the collapse of whatever coordinated strategy the group had assembled. Placed in separate rooms and confronted with the cell tower and platform data, Diane, Douglas, and Victor produced accounts that contradicted each other in ways that investigators documented carefully. The evidence was not something that could be explained away, Douglas confessed. The confession included the location of the burial. On December 3rd, 2021, police and forensic technicians excavated the site at Praia de Itapiruba Norte. Amanda's body was recovered. She had been buried there for 18 days. The criminal proceedings that followed were extensive, legally contested at every stage, and ultimately conclusive. On January 25th, 2022, state prosecutors filed formal charges against all three defendants: torture, illegal confinement, aggravated homicide, and concealment of a corpse. The indictment also included a request for civil reparations to Amanda's surviving heirs, which is to say, to her 2-year-old daughter. The defense mounted significant legal challenges throughout the pre-trial phase. One of the more notable maneuvers involved a habeas corpus petition filed before Brazil's Superior Court of Justice in Brasilia, catalogued under number HC 84217SC. Defense attorneys argued that their client's right of full access to the case files had been violated, particularly in relation to the telecommunications data. They requested a suspension of the jury trial pending review of these alleged procedural nullities. The court's presiding minister denied the preliminary injunction. The technical reports produced from the telecommunications and banking data had been properly attached to the original inquiry file, to which the defense had documented access. The procedural challenge did not succeed. On March 28, 2023, the Third Criminal Chamber of the Santa Catarina Court of Justice issued a unanimous ruling on the indictment phase. The appellate judge rejected any basis for blocking the defendant's submission to a jury trial. The cell tower evidence placing Amanda at the house, combined with the irreconcilable contradictions in the defendant's statements, met the threshold for proceeding. The jury trial was held on August 16, 2023, at the courthouse of the Comarca of Imbituba. The lead prosecutor, Fernando Guilherme de Brito Ramos, argued the case before the jury. One of the central arguments made by the prosecution concerned the basis of the killing itself. The state argued, and the case files support, that investigators never found a single piece of evidence confirming Douglas's theory that Amanda was a spy, a faction informant, or the advance scout for any kind of attack. her phone, her social media, her communication records. All of it was consistent with a young woman on a vacation trip, not with any organized criminal operation. The 2-year-old daughter she left in Fazenda Rio Grande was not the detail of someone running an intelligence mission. The jury found all 3 defendants guilty on all counts. The homicide was found to carry 2 qualifying circumstances under Brazilian criminal law. The first was base motive, applied here to the paranoid desire to eliminate someone who had witnessed a drug trafficker's arsenal. The second was means that prevented the victim's defense, established through the confinement with restraints and gag, the continuous presence of a firearm, the 3-to-1 numerical ratio, and the transport to an isolated location. The sentencing phase produced outcomes that carry their own legal complexity, and I want to give these numbers the space they deserve, because they tell you something important about how the court read each person's role. Diane Mayara Pascual received 23 years and 4 months. Douglas Straccioni da Silva received 20 years and 10 months. Victor Straccioni da Silva received 20 years and 4 months. The combined total exceeds 60 years. Think about that disparity for a moment. Diane received the heaviest sentence. Not Douglas, the man who fired the shots. Brazilian sentencing rules allow for mitigation in the presence of specific attenuating circumstances. Douglas confessed, which under Brazilian criminal law creates a mandatory sentence reduction. Victor was under 21 at the time of the crime. Another mandatory mitigation. Diane had neither. The court found no applicable attenuation, and the aggravating weight of her conduct, using a pre-existing friendship to deliver the victim to her death, remained undiminished in full. That is what the court concluded. The person who made the invitation carried the heaviest legal weight for it. Her defense attorneys characterized the sentence as excessive and the trial as biased. The lawyers for the Straccioni brothers announced appeals based on alleged procedural nullities. Those proceedings, as of the filing of this episode, remain ongoing before the Santa Catarina Court of Justice. I want to return to Amanda for a moment before we close, because the procedural and evidentiary dimensions of this case are real and important, but they are not what this case is actually about. Amanda Albach Silva was 21 years old. She had a daughter who was 2. She came from Fazenda Rio Grande with no expectation that her trust in a person she had known for years was about to be used against her in the most absolute way possible. The last public image she left behind is a beach photograph taken in the sun, the kind of photograph anyone takes when they are somewhere beautiful and they want to share it. She did nothing wrong. She photographed something she was not supposed to see, or said something within earshot of the wrong person, and in the deranged moral arithmetic of a man who had absorbed the ideology of the drug trade without the infrastructure that usually surrounds it. That was enough. I've spent a long time reviewing the sequence of those 8 hours on November 15th, and I keep returning to the moment the voice message was recorded. Amanda was bound. Her nose had been broken. A gun had been in the room for hours. She was being made to say words that were not hers, to tell her family she was fine, to tell them not to worry, to give them a story that would delay the search. And somewhere in that recording, in the catch in her voice, in the sound of the wind, she left something they could not script, something her family recognized immediately. The investigators found her because her phone's connection to a cell tower placed her where her killers said she wasn't. But her family knew something was wrong before any of that. They heard it in her voice. The Blackout Tapes will return.